Dealey Plaza, Ford's Theater. These locations are indelibly etched in the American psyche as some of the places where our history was suddenly and violently shifted in a new direction. But John F. Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln were only half of the U.S. presidents to be slayed in office. The other two, James A. Garfield in 1881 and William McKinley in 1901, tend to get less attention, and so too do the places associated with where these attacks took place. William McKinley was shot at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, in an exquisite and unfortunately temporary building known as the Temple of Music. Today, the site lies on a quiet residential road with a modest but dignified memorial to mark the historic event. But it's the last, or rather 20th president that I want to talk about here. Because unlike the other three, the site where James Garfield was shot is not so obvious to the casual passerby, despite it being one of the most heavily touristed places in the country. On July 2nd, 1881, Garfield was on his way out of Washington, D.C. to give a speech at Williams College and accompany his wife on a vacation to the Jersey Shore. At the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station, failed lawyer, political activist, and proof that men what happened isn't a universally applicable meme, Charles J. Guiteau shot Garfield twice, having deluded himself into the belief that Garfield had wrongly passed him over for a fancy government job. Among the witnesses was Garfield's Secretary of War, Robert Todd Lincoln, whose father, Abraham Lincoln, had been assassinated just blocks away 16 years previously. Garfield didn't die immediately, and in fact live on for a full 2.5 months. With today's medical knowledge, Garfield would have almost certainly lived, and indeed perhaps even more capable doctors of his day might have been able to save his life. But alas, Garfield passed away from complications from his wounds on September 19th, 1881, bringing his vice president and perfect encapsulation of the men what happened meme Charles A. Arthur to the presidency. This isn't the full story of how the Garfield assassination happened, and there are many more rabbit holes to go down. The life and downfall of the assailant Charles Guiteau, the medical failures of Garfield's doctors, how Garfield was able to serve as president for months on his deathbed, but I'm going to focus on one aspect. Where did this happen? The train station where Garfield was shot, the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station, stood from 1872 to 1907. The building stood at the intersection of B Street Northwest, now Constitution Avenue, and 6th Street Northwest along the National Mall in Washington, D.C. After its demolition, the site was considered for a time as the site of a new university, but during World War I became home to temporary wartime buildings instead. In 1937, the site was cleared, and the first of the National Gallery of Art's two buildings was built on the footprint of the old train station. Completed in 1941, it stands to this day. So, if today the train station is the site of the National Gallery of Art, a public building, and we still travel to the spot where Garfield was shot, is there some Dutch master's painting hanging out over the spot keeping a silent vigil? Well, let's take a look. Using Google Earth, we can overlay this random McNally map of Washington, D.C. from the turn of the 20th century right onto the modern-day cityscape. The Baltimore and Potomac Railroad station still stood at the time of this map, and we can clearly see the outline of the station. Fortunately, the layout of D.C. hasn't changed all that much in the last 12 decades, and it's fairly easy to get a nice match for each city block, even as many of the buildings that were once there are now gone. From this map, we can also see that the street on the north side of the station, then B Street and now Constitution Avenue, was narrower on that block than elsewhere, and the station building stretched out into the middle of what is now a wider street on the north side of the National Gallery. We can then take this diagram of the interior layout of the station and line it up with the outline we just drew. Unfortunately, there's not a perfect match because the larger map didn't have every curving corner of the building, but it's pretty straightforward to get within just a few feet. And even better, this diagram has the exact spot where Garfield was shot clearly marked. Once we get them lined up, we can drop a pin on that spot, remove all the overlays, and see exactly where that location is now on Google Earth. So what's at that spot? Well, let's go see for ourselves.
And here we go. Right here on the northwestern side of the National Gallery of Art's driveway. Just right off the end of the sidewalk, we have the spot where in 1881 President James Garfield was assassinated, or at least where he was shot. Now, about 200 yards away from where I just stood, there are these markers that give a bit of history about the assassination, a little bit about the building, and generally act as the main memorial for Garfield in this area. They're not right on the spot, but they're pretty close.